In the beginning, there was no sky, no earth, no sea, no gods, only something the ancient Greeks would call chaos. But chaos is not disorder, not in the way we understand it. It is not destruction, not confusion. It is emptiness, a vast, silent void without form, without structure, without meaning. It is not a place. It is the absence of place. And from that absence, everything begins. There is no explosion, no sudden creation. Instead, existence unfolds slowly, almost quietly, as if reality itself is awakening. From chaos, the first beings emerge. Not born, not created in the human sense, but simply appearing, as if they had always been waiting within the void. The first is Gaia, the earth, solid, eternal, foundational. Where chaos is emptiness, Gaia is presence. She is the ground beneath everything that will ever exist. She does not just represent the earth, she is the earth itself. Mountains, valleys, plains, all are part of her being. And unlike chaos, Gaia has form. She is the first structure in existence, the first stability. Then comes Tartarus, not above, but below. A deep, shadowed abyss beneath Gaia, a place that will later become the prison of defeated gods and monsters. Even now, in the earliest stage of existence, the idea of depth, of darkness, of something hidden beneath the surface already exists. And then Eros appears. Not the later god of romantic love, but something far more fundamental. Eros is attraction, connection, the force that draws things together. Without Eros, nothing would combine, nothing would grow, nothing would become more than itself. It is the invisible pull that allows creation to continue beyond this first moment. Already, the universe has begun to take shape. Not through design, but through emergence. Gaia, the earth, does not remain alone for long. From herself, she brings forth Uranus, the sky. He stretches above her, vast and endless, covering her completely. Together, Gaia and Uranus form the first true pairing, earth and sky, foundation and expansion, below and above. This is the first relationship in existence. And from it comes the next generation. The Titans. They are not gentle beings. They are vast, powerful, and elemental. Each represents forces of nature and existence, time, memory, light, ocean, and more. Among them are Oceanus, the endless river surrounding the world, Hyperion, associated with the sun, Mnemosyne, memory itself, and Themis, the embodiment of order and natural law. But one Titan stands apart. Cronus, the youngest and the most dangerous. Because while the Titans are powerful, they are not free. Uranus, their father, fears them. Not because of what they are, but because of what they might become. And so he does something that defines the first age of existence. He suppresses them. He forces them back into Gaia, imprisoning them within the earth itself. It is the first act of control, the first attempt to stop change. And Gaia, the earth, who feels it. She feels the weight of her children trapped inside her, unable to emerge, unable to exist fully. And for the first time, something new appears in the universe. Not creation, not structure, but resistance. Gaia cannot overthrow Uranus herself, but she can act through her children. She calls upon them, asking for one who will challenge their father. Most refuse. Uranus is too powerful, too absolute. But Cronus does not refuse. He steps forward, and in doing so, he becomes the first rebel in existence. Gaia gives him a weapon, a sickle, curved and sharp. Not forged, but grown. A piece of the world itself, shaped for a single purpose. And when Uranus descends once more to cover Gaia, Cronus strikes. The act is sudden, violent, irreversible. He overthrows his father, separating sky from earth, ending the first order of existence. This is not just a rebellion. It is the first transition of power. The first time one generation replaces another. And from this moment, the universe is no longer static. It changes. It evolves. It becomes unstable. Cronus takes control. The Titans rule. And for a brief moment, it seems like a new order has been established. But something has already been set in motion. Because power taken through fear is always held through fear. And Cronus, like Uranus before him, will not escape that cycle. The first age of existence is over. The age of the Titans has begun. And already, the seeds of its destruction are growing. Power once taken is never secure. Cronus now rules the cosmos. The sky has been separated from the earth. The Titans are free. The weight that once pressed them into Gaia has been lifted, and for the first time, existence feels open, expansive, possible. It should be an age of stability. But it is. Because Cronus remembers exactly how he came to power. Not through inheritance, but through rebellion. Not through order, but through violence. And that memory becomes fear. The prophecy comes quietly. Not as a dramatic declaration, not as a thunderous warning from the heavens, but as something inevitable, a truth that cannot be avoided. Cronus will be overthrown by his own child. The pattern has already been set. Uranus fell to his son. Now Cronus will fall to his. And once the idea exists, it cannot be undone. Fear reshapes everything. Cronus does not try to change fate. He tries to control it. He marries Rhea, a titaness of fertility and motherhood, a union that should bring life, continuity, and stability. Instead, it becomes something far darker. Because every time Rhea gives birth, Cronus is waiting. And as each child is born, he devours them. One by one. Hestia swallowed. Demeter swallowed. Hera swallowed. Hades swallowed. Poseidon swallowed. There is no hesitation. No remorse. To Cronus, this is not cruelty. It is prevention. If the child never grows, it can never rebel. If the future never arrives, it can never replace the present. But this is the flaw of power driven by fear. It destroys what it is trying to preserve. Rhea endures this again and again, watching her children vanish before they can even exist. And unlike Gaia before her, she does not wait until the system collapses. She acts. When her sixth child is born, she refuses to lose another. This child is Zeus. And this time, she hides him. She travels in secret to the island of Crete, where she gives birth away from Cronus' reach. The child is concealed in a cave, protected by nymphs and guarded by the curates, warriors who clash their weapons together to drown out the sound of the infant's cries. Every detail matters. Every sound, every movement, every decision. Because if Cronus hears, the cycle continues. Instead of the child, Rhea gives Cronus a stone, wrapped in cloth. And he swallows it without question. Because power, when blinded by fear, becomes careless. Zeus survives. And for the first time, the cycle is broken. But survival is not enough. Zeus does not grow as a passive figure hidden from the world. He grows in secret, but also in preparation. He is raised among nature, among beings who exist outside the rigid structure of Titan rule. And as he matures, something becomes clear. He is not like the Titans. He is something new. When Zeus comes of age, he does not rush forward in blind rebellion. He plans, because he understands something his predecessors did not. Power is not only taken through force. It is taken through strategy. With the help of Metis, a titaness associated with wisdom and cunning, Zeus devises a way to undo what Cronus has done. Not by direct confrontation, but by reversal. Cronus must be made to release what he has consumed. Zeus approaches him not as a challenger, but as something less threatening. Disguised, patient, controlled, he presents Cronus with a mixture, a potion designed to force him to vomit. Cronus drinks, and the past comes back. One by one, the swallowed children are released. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, not reborn, but returned. And with their return, the balance of power shifts instantly. Cronus is no longer unchallenged. He is surrounded. But even now, the conflict is not immediate. Because this is no longer a single act of rebellion. This is war. The Titans remain loyal to Cronus. The old order does not collapse just because it has been challenged. It resists, it consolidates, it prepares. And so begins the Titanomachy. A war not of men, but of gods. It does not last days. It does not last years. It lasts for 10 years. A decade of continuous cosmic conflict. The battlefield is not a single place, but existence itself. Mountains are torn apart, seas are churned into chaos. The sky itself becomes unstable as forces clash on a scale that has never existed before. The Titans are powerful, ancient, connected to the very structure of the world. But the Olympians, Zeus and his siblings, have something different. They have purpose. They are not fighting to preserve power. They are fighting to change it. Still, the war reaches a stalemate. Neither side can dominate the other. Because raw strength alone is not enough. And once again, strategy becomes the turning point. Zeus realizes that the Titans are not the only beings imprisoned by the old order. Deep within Tartarus, the same abyss that existed from the beginning, are creatures even more powerful than the Titans. The Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones. These beings were imprisoned by Uranus long before Cronus ever ruled. Their power was seen as too great, too uncontrollable. But Zeus sees something different. Not a threat, but an advantage. He descends into Tartarus and frees them. And in doing so, he changes the nature of the war entirely. The Cyclopes repay Zeus by forging weapons. Not ordinary weapons, but symbols of divine power itself. To Zeus, they give the thunderbolt. To Poseidon, the trident. To Hades, the helm of invisibility. These are not just tools. They are extensions of authority. They define the domains these gods will come to rule. With these weapons, and with the hundred-handed ones unleashed upon the battlefield, the balance shifts. The war intensifies. No longer equal, no longer uncertain. The Titans begin to fall. One by one, they are overwhelmed not just by force, but by coordination, by unity, by something they never possessed. Because the Titans ruled through dominance. But the Olympians fight as a system. And that difference decides everything. In the final phase of the war, the Olympians drive the Titans back. Not to defeat them completely, but to contain them. They are cast into Tartarus. Not destroyed, but imprisoned. Guarded by the very beings Zeus freed. The old order is not erased. It is buried. And with that, the Titanomachy ends. The second great age of existence comes to a close. The Titans fall. The Olympians rise. But even in victory, something lingers. Because Zeus has not ended the cycle. He has inherited it. He now stands where Cronus once stood. At the top, unchallenged, and aware that power always invites replacement. The question is no longer whether the cycle exists. It is whether it can ever be broken. The age of the Olympians has begun, but its future is not yet secure. Victory does not end conflict. It reshapes it. After the Titanomachy, the universe is not at peace. It is quiet, but not stable. The Titans have fallen, yes, cast into Tartarus, buried beneath the weight of their own era, but the structure of existence is still undefined. Because overthrowing power is one thing, replacing it is another. Zeus now stands at the center of everything, not just as a victor, but as a decision. The world must be organized. The chaos that once existed cannot return. The instability of the Titan age cannot continue. And unlike Cronus, Zeus understands something essential. Power cannot be held through fear alone. It must be structured, shared, defined. And so, instead of ruling as a solitary figure, Zeus divides the cosmos. Not randomly, not emotionally, but deliberately. With his brothers Poseidon and Hades, he draws lots, a symbolic act, but one with immense consequence. The sky goes to Zeus. The sea goes to Poseidon. The underworld goes to Hades. The earth remains shared. This division is not just territorial. It is conceptual. For the first time, existence is organized into domains, each governed, each controlled, each defined by a specific kind of power. Zeus does not become the sole ruler of everything. He becomes the highest authority within a system. And that system is what stabilizes the new age. Olympus rises as the center of divine presence. Not just a mountain, but a symbol. A place above the world, yet connected to it. A realm where the gods exist not as distant abstractions, but as active forces within reality. They observe, intervene, influence, and sometimes disrupt. The Olympians are not like the Titans. They are more human. Not weaker, but more complex. They feel anger, jealousy, desire, pride. They form alliances and rivalries. They are not perfect embodiments of natural forces. They are personalities with power. And that changes everything. Because the universe is no longer governed by distant, impersonal beings. It is governed by characters. Zeus establishes himself not only as king, but as the enforcer of order. His weapon, the thunderbolt, is not just destructive, it is symbolic. It represents authority that can strike from above, instantly, decisively. It is the visible sign of control over the sky and, by extension, over the balance of the world. But Zeus does not rule alone. Hera stands beside him, not as an equal in power, but as a counterpart in function. She represents marriage, order within relationships, the structure of family and continuity, but her role is not passive. She challenges Zeus, questions him, resents him. Because while Zeus governs the world, he does not govern himself. And that tension becomes one of the defining dynamics of Olympus. Poseidon, ruling the sea, embodies instability. The ocean is not fixed. It shifts, rises, crashes, recedes. It cannot be controlled completely, only managed. And Poseidon reflects that. Powerful, unpredictable, often driven by emotion rather than calculation. Hades, ruling the underworld, is something else entirely. He is not chaotic. He is not rebellious. He is constant. The underworld is not a place of punishment alone. It is a place of inevitability. Every life ends there. Every soul passes through his domain. And unlike Zeus or Poseidon, Hades does not seek expansion. He maintains. He governs what cannot be avoided. Together, the three brothers define the structure of existence. Sky, sea, death. And between them, the world unfolds. But even with this structure, the universe is not empty. Other beings still exist. Forces older than the Olympians. Creatures that were not defeated in the Titanomachy because they were never fully part of it. And one of them rises. Typhon. He is not a god in the traditional sense. He is something closer to a force of pure destruction. Born from Gaia and Tartarus, Typhon represents the last resistance of the old order, a final attempt by the primordial world to reclaim control from the Olympians. He is vast, monstrous, uncontainable. His form defies description, serpentine, towering, shifting. Fire erupts from him, storms follow his movement, even the gods hesitate. Because Typhon is not just powerful, he is overwhelming. For the first time since the Titanomachy, the Olympians face something that cannot be easily categorized or controlled. And even Zeus is tested. The confrontation between Zeus and Typhon is not like the war against the Titans. It is not structured. It is not organized. It is raw, direct, a clash between authority and chaos. Typhon challenges everything Zeus has built. Not just his power, but his system. If Typhon wins, the order of Olympus collapses. The divisions of sky, sea, and underworld disappear. The universe returns to something earlier, something uncontrolled. The battle is intense, violent, unpredictable. At moments, Zeus falters. At moments, Typhon gains ground. But in the end, Zeus prevails. Not because he is stronger in a simple sense, but because he represents something Typhon does not. Structure, coordination, defined power. Zeus defeats Typhon and buries him beneath the earth, often said to be under Mount Etna, where his rage still erupts as volcanic fire. And with that, the last major threat to Olympian rule is contained. The system holds. The world stabilizes. But something important has been revealed. Even after victory, even after organization, chaos never disappears. It only waits. Olympus now stands unchallenged. The gods take their places. Their domains are defined. Their relationships begin to shape the world below. And for the first time, the attention of the gods begins to turn outward, towards something new, something fragile, something unpredictable in a completely different way. Humanity. Because the next phase of Greek mythology is not about gods fighting gods. It is about gods interacting with mortals, creating them, testing them, punishing them, rewarding them, and through those interactions, defining what it means to exist in a world ruled by forces that are powerful, emotional, and often unpredictable. The age of divine order has begun. But the story is no longer just about gods. It is about what happens when gods and humans collide. Power can be seized. Power can be divided. Power can even be stabilized. But ruling, truly ruling, is something else entirely. After the defeat of the Titans and the fall of Typhon, Zeus stands at the center of a universe that is finally structured. The sky obeys him. The thunderbolt answers his will. The other gods recognize his authority. But authority is not the same as control. Because Zeus does not rule a silent world. He rules a world filled with gods, each with their own desires, rivalries, ambitions, and flaws. And above all, he rules himself. Zeus is not a distant, perfect figure. He is decisive, powerful, often just. But he is also impulsive, emotional, and unpredictable. And it is within that contradiction that his rule is defined. As king of the gods, Zeus establishes order through law. Not written law, not something carved into stone, but a natural, divine order that governs behavior across gods and mortals alike. Oaths are sacred, hospitality is enforced, justice, though imperfect, exists as a guiding principle. When boundaries are crossed, Zeus responds, sometimes with wisdom, sometimes with force, and sometimes with something far more personal. Because Zeus does not separate his role as ruler from his identity as an individual. And that is where complexity begins. His relationships define much of his story. Hera, his wife, is not simply a queen beside him. She is a constant counterbalance. She represents order within marriage, loyalty, structure within relationships. And Zeus repeatedly disrupts that structure. His affairs are not occasional. They are constant. Across gods, nymphs, and mortals, Zeus forms connections that are rarely simple and never without consequence. From these unions come many of the figures who will define Greek mythology: gods, heroes, kings. But each relationship leaves behind tension. Hera's anger is not quiet. It is active, focused, enduring. She does not challenge Zeus directly in most cases, because his authority is absolute, but she expresses her power through indirect means. Through punishment, through manipulation, through targeting those Zeus favors. And this creates a recurring pattern. Zeus acts, Hera responds, and mortals often suffer the consequences. This is one of the defining truths of Greek mythology. The gods are powerful, but they are not detached. Their actions ripple outward, affecting lives far below Olympus. Zeus also defines justice. But justice, under Zeus, is not always consistent. It is not blind. It is not purely rational. It is shaped by circumstance, by emotion, by perspective. When Prometheus defies him, Zeus punishes him eternally. When mortals show arrogance, hubris, Zeus strikes them down. But when those he favors act wrongly, he may forgive, or ignore, or delay judgment. This is not justice as balance. It is justice as authority. And it reflects a deeper idea within Greek mythology, that power does not always align with fairness. Yet Zeus is not simply arbitrary. He maintains order. He prevents the world from collapsing back into chaos. He enforces the structure that allows gods and mortals to coexist. Without Zeus, there is no system. But with Zeus, there is tension. Because his rule is stable, but not peaceful. Beyond Olympus, Zeus interacts directly with the mortal world. He observes. He tests. He intervenes. Sometimes he rewards piety and respect. Other times, he punishes disobedience or arrogance. And sometimes, he simply acts out of desire, transforming himself into different forms: a swan, a bull, a shower of gold. Zeus moves between worlds in ways no other god does. He crosses boundaries constantly, blurring the line between divine and mortal existence. And through these interactions, the world begins to fill with stories. Because every action of Zeus creates consequences. Children who will become heroes. Conflicts that will escalate into wars. Curses that will echo across generations. Zeus is not just ruling the present. He is shaping the future. At the same time, he must maintain control over the gods themselves. Olympus is not free of conflict. Poseidon challenges him at times. Hera conspires against him. Other gods take sides, form alliances, create divisions. And Zeus must respond carefully. Too much force, and he becomes a tyrant like Cronus. Too little, and the system fractures. So he balances. He punishes rebellion, but not excessively. He asserts authority, but allows independence. Because unlike the Titans, the Olympians are not bound by fear alone. They are bound by structure. And Zeus is the center of that structure. But even Zeus is not beyond fate. This is one of the most important aspects of Greek mythology. There are forces even above the king of gods. The Moirai, the fates. They do not rule. They do not command. But they define what will happen. And even Zeus does not fully escape their influence. He may delay fate, influence it, navigate around it, but he cannot erase it entirely. This creates a subtle limitation to his power. He is the most powerful god, but not all-powerful. And that distinction matters, because it means the world is not entirely under his control. There are boundaries even for him. And within those boundaries, the stories of gods and mortals unfold. Zeus's reign marks the beginning of a new kind of mythological world. Not one defined by creation or cosmic war, but by interaction, by relationships, by consequences, and by the constant tension between order and chaos, control and freedom, power and limitation. The universe is now stable enough for something new to emerge. Not just gods, but stories about how gods shape the lives of others. And soon, those others will take center stage. Humans will be created, given gifts and burdens, tested and transformed. And through them, the true complexity of the Greek mythological world will unfold. Because ruling the gods is one thing, but influencing humanity is something far more unpredictable. A kingdom is not defined by its king alone. It is defined by those who stand beside him and those who stand apart. After Zeus establishes himself as ruler of the sky and leader of the Olympians, the structure of divine power begins to settle into something more complex. Authority is no longer singular. It is distributed, divided across domains, shaped by personalities that do not always align. And among the most powerful forces in this system are three figures who both support and challenge the balance of Olympus. Hera, Poseidon, Hades. Each governs a different aspect of existence. Each represents a different form of power. And each, in their own way, reveals the limits of Zeus's control. Hera is queen of the gods, but her role is not defined by submission. It is defined by tension. She represents marriage, fidelity, and the structure of family, institutions that, in human society, are meant to provide stability and continuity. Yet her own marriage to Zeus is anything but stable. Because Zeus is not faithful, and Hera is not passive. Her power lies not in overthrowing Zeus, but in resisting him within the boundaries of divine order. She cannot replace him, she cannot openly destroy him, but she can act indirectly, strategically, persistently. And she does. Her anger is precise. It is rarely directed at Zeus himself, because direct confrontation would destabilize the entire system, but instead at those involved in his betrayals. Mortals, nymphs, even their children. Hera's punishments are not random. They are personal, focused, often prolonged across generations. In many myths, she becomes the force that transforms moments of divine desire into long-term human suffering. Heroes are tested not only by fate, but by Hera's resentment. Entire lineages are shaped by her interventions. And yet, she is not simply a figure of vengeance. She is also a guardian of order. She protects the sanctity of marriage, even as her own is constantly violated. She upholds the idea of loyalty, even in a system where loyalty is rarely rewarded. This contradiction defines her. She is both enforcer of structure and product of its failure. Poseidon, by contrast, does not operate through quiet persistence. He embodies instability. As ruler of the sea, Poseidon governs a domain that cannot be fully controlled. The ocean shifts constantly, calm one moment, violent the next. It connects distant lands, enables trade and exploration, but also isolates, destroys, and consumes. And Poseidon reflects that duality. He is powerful, proud, and deeply sensitive to perceived disrespect. Unlike Zeus, who calculates, Poseidon reacts. He does not always seek long-term control. He seeks recognition, respect, dominance within his domain. When challenged, he responds immediately. Storms rise, waves crash, entire fleets are lost. His conflicts often extend into the mortal world, where sailors, cities, and kingdoms depend on his favor. A single act of offense can lead to years of punishment. One of his defining traits is rivalry. He contests for power not only with mortals, but with other gods. His competition with Athene over the city of Athens is one of the clearest examples, a conflict not just of power, but of identity. Poseidon offers strength. Athene offers wisdom. And the city chooses wisdom. Poseidon does not forget. He rarely does. This is what makes him dangerous. Not just his power, but his memory. His ability to carry resentment forward, to act long after the original offense. And yet, like Hera, he is not simply destructive. He creates as well. Horses are often associated with him, symbols of strength, speed, and movement. He represents the untamed forces of nature, but also the potential within them. Hades is different. Where Hera resists and Poseidon reacts, Hades endures. He rules the underworld, not as a place of punishment alone, but as a realm of inevitability. Every life ends there. Every soul passes into his domain. And unlike Zeus or Poseidon, Hades does not interfere frequently in the world above. He does not seek attention. He does not demand worship in the same way. He governs what is unavoidable. Death. But Greek mythology does not portray death as pure evil. It is not chaos. It is not destruction. It is part of order. And Hades reflects that. He is often misunderstood, not a villain, but a necessary force. His realm is structured, organized. Souls are guided, judged, and assigned places based on their lives. There is no randomness in his domain. Only consequence. His most well-known story, the abduction of Persephone, reveals another side of his nature. It is an act that disrupts the balance between worlds, pulling a living figure into the realm of the dead. But even here, the result is not total destruction. It becomes a cycle. Persephone spends part of the year in the underworld and part on Earth. And through that cycle, the seasons are born. Life and death are no longer separate. They are connected. Hades does not break the system. He defines its limits. Together, Hera, Poseidon, and Hades form a kind of counterbalance to Zeus. Not by replacing him, but by shaping the world around him. Hera maintains social order, even as she exposes its flaws. Poseidon embodies natural power, even as he disrupts stability. Hades governs the inevitable, even as he remains distant from daily existence. And Zeus must navigate all of them. Because ruling is not about eliminating opposition. It is about managing it. The Olympian system works not because everyone agrees, but because no one can dominate completely. Power is distributed. Tension is constant. And balance is always temporary. But even with this structure in place, Olympus is not complete. There are still gods whose influence reaches beyond authority, beyond control, into the very nature of thought, art, war, love, and identity itself. And as they emerge more fully into the mythological world, the focus begins to shift again, away from structure and toward meaning, because the next generation of gods will not just govern the world. They will define how it is experienced. Power shapes the world, but meaning shapes how that world is understood. By the time the Olympian order stabilizes, the universe is no longer defined only by control over sky, sea, and death. Those foundations exist, they hold, they maintain structure, but within that structure, something more refined begins to emerge. Intellect, art, skill, identity. And these are embodied not by the older generation of gods, but by a different kind of divinity. Athene, Apollo, Artemis. They are not forces of raw dominance. They are forces of definition. They do not simply rule domains. They shape how those domains are experienced. Athene is born unlike any other god. She does not come into the world through a traditional union. She is not raised, not hidden, not grown over time. She arrives fully formed, armored, awake, from the mind of Zeus. The story is both symbolic and unsettling. Zeus warned that a child of Metis might surpass him, swallows Metis before the child is born, repeating, in a different form, the same fear-driven act once committed by Cronus. But instead of preventing the birth, he transforms it. Athene emerges directly from him, not suppressed, not destroyed, but redefined. And in doing so, she represents something entirely new. Wisdom not as passive knowledge, but as active strategy. She is not the goddess of war in its raw form that belongs to Ares. She is the goddess of war as calculation, planning, discipline, precision. Where Ares charges, Athene thinks. Where Ares destroys, Athene directs. And this distinction matters, because it reflects a deeper idea within Greek thought, that intelligence is a form of power equal to strength. Athene becomes closely tied to civilization itself. Cities, law, craftsmanship. She represents the structured development of human society, the move from chaos into order, from instinct into intention. Her relationship with Athens defines her role even further. When she competes with Poseidon for control of the city, she does not offer overwhelming force. She offers something sustainable. The olive tree, food, oil, light, a resource that supports life over time. And the city chooses her, not because she is stronger, but because she is wiser. Apollo is something different. If Athene represents thought, Apollo represents clarity. He is the god of the sun, though not originally in the earliest myths. He becomes associated with it over time, but more importantly, he is the god of truth, prophecy, music, and order. He is light not just physically, but intellectually. Where Apollo exists, things are revealed. Hidden truths come forward. Chaos becomes understandable. Through the Oracle of Delphi, Apollo speaks in prophecy, not directly, not simply, but through interpretation. His words are often ambiguous, layered, requiring thought to be understood. He does not give answers. He gives insight. And that distinction defines his nature. Apollo also governs music and art, but not in a chaotic or emotional sense. His music is structured, balanced, mathematical. It reflects harmony, the idea that the universe itself can be understood through patterns, through proportion, through reason. And yet, Apollo is not without darkness. His precision can become severity. His clarity can become cold. When angered, he does not lash out wildly, he acts with devastating accuracy. His punishments are not chaotic, they are exact. A plague, a single arrow, a targeted consequence. He represents the power of control taken to its extreme. Artemis, his twin, stands in contrast, where Apollo defines order within civilization. Artemis exists outside it. She is the goddess of the hunt, of wilderness, of the untamed world beyond human structure. She does not build cities. She avoids them. She moves through forests, mountains, and wild spaces, places untouched by systems of law or control. And within those spaces, she is absolute. Artemis represents independence, not just from others, but from expectation. She rejects traditional roles assigned to women in Greek society. She does not marry, she does not submit, she does not compromise her identity to fit into a system built by others. And that makes her powerful in a different way. She governs the boundary between civilization and nature, between what is controlled and what cannot be. She is also a protector of young women, of animals, of the vulnerable within her domain. But like all Greek gods, her protection is conditional. When her boundaries are violated, her response is immediate. Severe, unforgiving. Actaeon, who sees her bathing, is transformed into a stag and hunted by his own dogs. Niobe, who boasts of her children over Leto, is punished through the loss of them all. Artemis does not negotiate. She enforces. Together, Athene, Apollo, and Artemis redefine what divine power means. It is no longer only about control over physical domains. It is about influence over human experience. How people think, how they create, how they understand the world around them. Athene shapes strategy and intellect. Apollo shapes truth and expression. Artemis shapes independence and the natural boundary of existence. And through them, the focus of mythology begins to shift again. Because now, the world is not just governed. It is interpreted. And that interpretation begins to flow downward, into humanity, into stories of mortals who interact with these forces, who are guided, tested, punished, and transformed by them. The gods are no longer distant rulers. They are active participants. And soon, humans will enter the story fully, not as background figures, but as central characters. Because the next phase of Greek mythology is not about the structure of the gods. It is about what happens when divine power meets human limitation. When knowledge is given. When fire is stolen. When curiosity opens doors that cannot be closed. The age of humanity is about to begin. If Athene, Apollo, and Artemis define structure, clarity, and restraint, then this next group of gods reveals something far less controlled. Emotion, impulse, desire, chaos within order. Because Olympus is not a perfectly balanced system. It is a living one. And within it, there are forces that resist control not by rebellion, but by nature. Ares is war, not strategy, not discipline, but war in its rawest form. Violence, bloodshed, the uncontrollable surge of conflict that erupts when restraint breaks. Where Athene plans battles, Ares is the battle. He does not calculate outcomes. He exists in the moment of impact, the clash of weapons, the scream of soldiers, the chaos that follows when order collapses. And because of this, he is not widely admired. Even among the gods, war in its pure form is not noble. It is destructive, indiscriminate, Ares represents that truth. He is powerful, undeniably so, but also unpredictable and often ineffective when compared to the precision of Athene. In many myths, he is outmaneuvered, outthought, defeated not because he lacks strength, but because strength alone is not enough. Yet Ares persists, because conflict itself persists. No system, no matter how structured, can eliminate it entirely. Aphrodite, by contrast, represents something equally powerful, but far more subtle. Love, desire, attraction, forces that shape behavior without force. Her origin varies across myths. In some, she is born from the sea, rising from the foam created when Uranus is overthrown. In others, she is the daughter of Zeus. But in every version, she arrives as something undeniable, a presence that alters everything around it. Aphrodite does not command armies. She does not enforce law. She influences. She draws. She pulls gods and mortals alike into connections they cannot fully control. And those connections create consequences. Alliances form. Wars begin. Lives change direction entirely. The Trojan War itself begins with her influence. Because desire is not passive. It is active. It disrupts logic, overrides reason, and in doing so, it reveals something essential about existence. That not all power is visible. Hephaestus stands at the opposite end of that spectrum. Where Aphrodite represents beauty and attraction, Hephaestus represents creation through effort, through struggle. He is the god of fire and craftsmanship, the builder of Olympus, the maker of weapons, armor, and tools used by gods and heroes alike. But his story is marked by rejection. Unlike the other gods, Hephaestus is not physically perfect. In some myths, he is cast from Olympus as an infant because of his appearance. In others, he is thrown down during conflict. Either way, he falls, and survives, and creates. His power does not come from dominance, but from skill, from the ability to shape raw materials into something greater. He turns fire into function, metal into meaning, and through that, he becomes essential, even to those who once rejected him. His marriage to Aphrodite reflects a deeper contrast, beauty and desire paired with labor and creation. But the union is not stable. Aphrodite seeks passion. Hephaestus represents effort. And the tension between them becomes another example of imbalance within Olympus. Hermes moves differently. He does not dominate. He does not resist. He navigates. As the messenger god, Hermes exists between worlds, between gods and mortals, between life and death, between truth and deception. He is fast, clever, unpredictable, a trickster but not purely chaotic. He bends rules but understands them. From birth, Hermes demonstrates this nature, stealing cattle from Apollo as an infant, then cleverly negotiating his way out of punishment. Not through force, but through wit. This is his domain. Movement, exchange, communication. He guides souls to the underworld, delivers messages between gods, facilitates trade, travel, and transition. Where others define boundaries, Hermes crosses them. And in doing so, he connects the entire system together. Dionysus is something else entirely. He does not fit easily into Olympus. He is the god of wine, but also of ecstasy, madness, transformation. He represents the breaking of limits, the loss of control, but not as destruction alone. As release, where Apollo brings order, Dionysus dissolves it. Not permanently, but temporarily. He allows individuals to step outside structure, to experience something beyond identity, beyond role, beyond restraint. His followers enter states of frenzy, of unity, of emotional intensity that blurs the line between self and world. And this is both powerful and dangerous, because without structure, things can go too far. Dionysus embodies that edge, the boundary between liberation and chaos, between expression and loss of control. And like all such boundaries, it is unstable. Together, these gods complete the personality of Olympus. They are not foundations, they are expressions. Ares shows conflict. Aphrodite shows desire. Hephaestus shows creation through struggle. Hermes shows connection through movement. Dionysus shows transformation through release. And through them, the divine world becomes fully alive. Not just structured, not just controlled, but dynamic, contradictory, human in its emotions, even if not in its form. And now, with the gods fully defined, with their personalities, domains, and tensions established, the stage is set for something new. Because up until now, the world has been about gods, their power, their conflicts, their relationships. But the next phase of the story shifts focus toward something far more fragile, far more unpredictable, and far more relatable. Humans, because the gods are about to create them, shape them, test them, and through those interactions, define what it means to exist in a world ruled by forces beyond understanding. The age of humanity begins next. Up to this point, the world has been shaped by gods, formed by their actions, defined by their conflicts, but it is still incomplete, because there is no one to experience it, no one to struggle within it, no one to question it. And so humanity begins, but not as a perfect creation, not as a central purpose. In Greek mythology, humans are not the reason the universe exists. They are something added to it. And that difference matters. The story of humanity does not begin with Zeus. It begins with Prometheus, a titan, not an Olympian, one of the old order who does not fully align with the new. Prometheus survives the titanomachy not by strength, but by choice. He sides with Zeus during the war, helping the Olympians defeat his own kind. But loyalty does not mean obedience, because Prometheus sees something Zeus does not. Potential in humanity. According to myth, Prometheus shapes humans from clay. He forms them by hand, giving them shape, structure, presence. But they are incomplete. They exist, but they do not thrive, because they lack something essential. Knowledge. Fire. In the earliest state of humanity, people are weak, exposed, unable to cook food, unable to forge tools, unable to protect themselves effectively from the world around them. They live, but they do not advance. And Zeus intends it that way, because knowledge creates independence, and independence challenges authority. Prometheus disagrees, not out of rebellion alone, but out of belief. He sees humanity not as a threat, but as something worth developing. And so he does something that defines his entire legacy. He steals fire, not metaphorically, literally. Fire in Greek mythology is not just heat or light. It is technology, craft, transformation. With fire, humans can cook, create, build, innovate. It is the difference between survival and progress. Prometheus takes it from the gods and gives it to humanity. And in that moment, everything changes. Humans begin to grow, to learn, to shape their environment rather than simply endure it. They move from passive existence to active participation in the world. And Zeus sees this and understands immediately what it means. Not just a gift, but a shift in power. Because fire is not easily taken back. Once knowledge exists, it spreads. And Zeus responds, not with immediate destruction, but with punishment. Targeted, symbolic, enduring. Prometheus is captured, bound to a rock, and every day an eagle descends and devours his liver. Every night it regenerates, and the cycle repeats. Forever. This is not just punishment. It is a statement. Defiance against divine authority has consequences, especially when it empowers others. But Zeus does not stop there, because Prometheus is not the only one to be punished. Humanity must also pay, and the punishment comes in a different form. Not force, not destruction, but introduction. Zeus orders the creation of the first woman, Pandora. She is not shaped like Prometheus, humans. She is crafted by the gods themselves, each contributing something. Beauty, charm, skill, curiosity. She is not flawed. She is designed, and she is given a jar. Not a box, as later interpretations suggest, but a sealed container. And one instruction. Do not open it. But the instruction is part of the design. Because curiosity is not a weakness. It is a feature. Pandora arrives in the human world, and eventually she opens the jar. And from it, everything escapes. Disease, suffering, pain, loss, all the hardships that define human existence, released into the world permanently. But one thing remains inside. Hope. It does not escape. It stays contained. And this detail is one of the most debated elements of Greek mythology. Is hope a gift, something preserved for humanity? Or is it withheld, making suffering complete? The myth does not answer directly. It leaves the interpretation open. And that ambiguity defines the human condition within Greek thought. Humanity is not perfect, not protected, not central to the universe. It exists within a system controlled by forces beyond it. Given gifts, but also burdens. Empowered, but limited. And yet, it continues. Because even with suffering, even with punishment, humans do not disappear. They adapt. They endure. They grow. The ages of man further define this progression. The first age, the Golden Age, is one of ease. Humans live without suffering, without labor, without conflict. But it does not last. Each age that follows becomes more difficult, more complex, more burdened. Silver, bronze, heroic, and finally iron. The current age. An age defined not by perfection, but by struggle, work, conflict, mortality. And this progression reflects something fundamental. That human existence is not static. It changes. It declines in some ways, but also deepens. Because meaning does not come from ease. It comes from experience, from challenge, from the need to navigate a world that is not designed for comfort. And this is where Greek mythology shifts again. Because now humans are not just present. They are active. Their choices matter. Their actions create stories. And those stories begin to interact directly with the gods. Heroes will rise. Not perfect, not divine, but something in between. Shaped by gods, but defined by their own decisions. And through them, the next phase of mythology unfolds. Because the age of humanity is not just about creation. It is about testing. And the tests are about to begin. Humanity now exists. It has fire, knowledge, the capacity to grow. But it also carries something new. Suffering, uncertainty, limits. And within those limits, stories begin to form. Not stories of gods alone, but of humans navigating a world influenced by forces they cannot fully control. These early mortal myths are not about great heroes yet. They are about foundations, about how humanity understands itself, its origins, its place in the universe. And one of the first stories that defines this is destruction, not creation. The flood. The myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha begins with a problem. Humanity, over time, becomes corrupt. Not in a simple way, but gradually. Losing respect for the gods. Ignoring boundaries. Falling into violence, arrogance, disorder. And Zeus sees this, not as a failure of creation, but as something that must be corrected. And so he decides to end it. Not partially, not selectively, but completely. The flood is total. Rain falls without stopping. Rivers overflow. The sea rises. And the world is covered. Human civilization erased. But not entirely. Because Deucalion, son of Prometheus, is warned. He builds an ark. Not as a rebellion, but as preparation. And with him is Pyrrha. Together they survive, floating above a world that has been reset. When the waters finally recede, they are alone, two humans in a silent world. And the question becomes, how does humanity begin again? They seek guidance, not from Zeus, but from the remnants of divine wisdom. And they are told something cryptic, to throw the bones of their mother behind them. At first, it makes no sense. But then they understand. Their mother is the earth, Gaia, and her bones are stones. So they begin to throw stones behind them. And from those stones, new humans emerge. Men from Deucalion's stones, women from Pyrrha. It is a strange image, but meaningful. Humanity is not reborn as it was before. It is reshaped, harder, more enduring, less perfect but more resilient. The flood does not restore the golden age. It creates something new, an age where survival itself becomes part of identity. This is one of the key themes of early mortal myths. Humanity is not preserved in perfection. It is forged through challenge. Other myths explore similar ideas through transformation. Io is one of the earliest examples. A mortal woman loved by Zeus, which immediately places her in danger. Not because of Zeus, but because of Hera. To protect Io, or perhaps to conceal her, Zeus transforms her into a cow. But this transformation does not save her. It isolates her, removes her voice, her identity. She is still conscious, still aware, but unable to communicate. And Hera, suspicious, assigns Argus, a being with many eyes to watch her. Io cannot escape. She cannot explain. She cannot reclaim herself until Hermes intervenes, killing Argus and freeing her. But even then, her suffering continues. She wanders the world, driven by forces she cannot control, eventually reaching Egypt, where she is restored to human form. Her story is not about victory. It is about endurance, about identity under pressure, about transformation not as empowerment, but as challenge. Europa's story follows a different path. She is a mortal princess, and like Io, she becomes the focus of Zeus's attention. But this time, the interaction is more deliberate. Zeus transforms himself into a bull, white, calm, beautiful. Europa approaches without fear, and when she climbs onto his back, he carries her away, across the sea, to Crete. There she becomes part of a new story, a new lineage, the mother of kings. Her abduction is not framed as simple violence, but as transition, movement from one place, one identity, into another. And through her, entire civilizations will trace their origins. These myths are not isolated. They are patterns, transformation, displacement, suffering, adaptation. They define the early human experience within Greek mythology. Because humans do not control their world, they respond to it. They are shaped by gods, but not fully defined by them. And through these early stories, something begins to emerge. Not just survival, not just endurance, but agency, the ability to act, to choose, to become something more than what is imposed. And this leads to the next phase, the rise of heroes. Not gods, not ordinary mortals, but something in between. Individuals who carry divine influence but live human lives, who face challenges not just of survival, but of purpose. And the first of these heroes will define what it means to confront the impossible. Because the age of heroes is not about existing in the world. It is about changing it. And that begins with Perseus. Up to this point, humans have endured. They have suffered, adapted, survived within a world shaped by forces far beyond them. But now something changes. Because humanity does not remain passive. It produces individuals who act, who confront the world rather than simply respond to it. And these individuals become something new. Heroes, not gods, not ordinary mortals, but something in between, shaped by divine influence, yet defined by human limitation. And the first of these great figures is Perseus. His story does not begin with glory. It begins with fear. A king named Acrisius rules the city of Argos. He is powerful, secure, established, until a prophecy arrives. He will be killed by his own grandson. And like Uranus, like Cronus, he responds the same way. Not by accepting fate, but by trying to prevent it. His daughter, Danae, becomes the focus. If she never has a child, the prophecy cannot be fulfilled. So he imprisons her, not in a simple room, but in a sealed chamber, isolated, controlled, cut off from the world entirely. No contact, no escape, no possibility. But fate in Greek mythology is not something that can be sealed away. Zeus sees Danae, and like so many of his encounters, he does not approach directly. He transforms, this time into a shower of gold, light falling through the chamber, reaching her in a way no barrier can stop. And from that encounter, Perseus is born. Acrisius discovers the child and immediately understands what it means. The prophecy is already in motion. But instead of killing them directly, he chooses something else. Distanzo. He places Danae and the infant Perseus into a chest and casts them into the sea. Not execution, but abandonment. Let fate take them. Let the world decide. But once again, they survive. The chest washes ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they are taken in by a fisherman named Dictys. Perseus grows, not as a prince, not as a warrior, but as a young man in a quiet place, unaware of the full weight of his origin. Until power intervenes again. King Polydex, ruler of the island, desires Danae. But Perseus stands in the way. So Polydex does what rulers often do in myth. He creates a challenge, a task that seems impossible, something that will remove the obstacle without direct confrontation. He demands that Perseus bring him the head of Medusa. Not a simple monster, but one of the Gorgons, a being whose gaze turns anyone who looks upon her into stone. This is not a mission. It is a death sentence. But Perseus does not refuse, because this is what defines a hero. Not invulnerability, but willingness. And unlike earlier mortals, Perseus is not alone. The gods intervene, not randomly, but deliberately. Athene provides him with guidance. Hermes provides him with tools. Others contribute as well. A reflective shield, winged sandals, a helm of invisibility, a sword. Each item is specific, purposeful, because brute force will not defeat Medusa. Only strategy will. Perseus seeks out the Gree, three ancient beings who share a single eye. Through cunning, he gains the information he needs. Not by strength, but by thinking. And when he finally reaches Medusa, he does not look at her directly. He uses the reflection of his shield. He moves carefully, precisely, and in a single moment, he strikes. Medusa falls, not through overpowering her, but through understanding the rules of the challenge. And this is what defines the shift in mythology. Heroes do not win because they are stronger than the world. They win because they learn how to navigate it. Perseus takes the head, and even in death, it retains its power. A weapon, a tool, a symbol. But the story does not end there. Because heroism is not a single act. It is a sequence. On his return, Perseus encounters Andromeda, chained to a rock, offered as sacrifice to a sea monster, punished for the actions of others. And Perseus intervenes. He defeats the creature, not just as a warrior, but as someone who has already faced the impossible. He rescues her, and in doing so, becomes more than a survivor. He becomes a protector, a figure who alters the outcome of events. But the prophecy remains. It always does. Perseus eventually returns to Argos, not to seek revenge, not to claim power, but simply as part of the unfolding of events. And in a moment that is almost accidental. It happens. During a public event, a competition, Perseus throws a discus. It goes off course and strikes Acrisius, killing him. The prophecy is fulfilled, not through intention, not through direct action, but through inevitability. And this is one of the central truths of Greek mythology. Fate cannot be avoided, only approached differently. Perseus does not become a tyrant. He does not repeat the cycle of fear. He moves forward, founding cities, living a life shaped by his actions but not consumed by them. And in doing so, he defines the first true model of the hero. Not perfect, not invincible, but capable, resourceful, willing to act. And through him, a pattern is established. Heroes will emerge, each facing challenges unique to them, each shaped by the gods but not controlled by them, each revealing something about what it means to exist in a world where power is uneven, fate is real, and action matters. And the next hero will push that idea further than anyone before, because his story is not one task, not one victory, but a lifetime of struggle. His name is Heracles. If Perseus defines the beginning of the hero, then Heracles defines its extremes, because his story is not about a single quest. It is about endurance, over time, across suffering, through failure, redemption, and repetition. Heracles is not simply strong. He is the strongest. But in Greek mythology, strength alone is never enough. His life begins, like many heroes, with Zeus. And like many of Zeus's children, his existence creates conflict before he even draws breath. His mother, Alcmene, is mortal, and Hera knows exactly what that means. Another child, another reminder of Zeus's betrayal. And unlike other stories, Hera acts immediately. Not with subtlety, not with delay, but with intent. She sends serpents to kill the infant Heracles in his cradle. And this is the first sign of who he is. Not because he survives, but how. The infant does not cry, does not flee. He grasps the serpents and strangles them. Strength before understanding, power before control. And this becomes the defining pattern of his life. Because Heracles is not shaped by wisdom first. He is shaped by force. As he grows, he becomes unmatched physically. A warrior without equal. A figure capable of feats no other human could achieve. But his strength is not balanced. Not yet. And Hera does not forget. At the height of his early life, she strikes. Not with weapons, but with madness. A temporary loss of control. A break in the boundary between action and awareness. And in that moment, Heracles does something irreversible. He kills his own family. Not as a decision, not as a choice, but as a consequence. And when the madness fades, he is left with the truth. This is where his story truly begins. Because Heracles is not defined by the act itself, but by what follows. He does not deny it. He does not escape it. He seeks to atone, to find a way to restore balance, to give meaning to something that cannot be undone. And this leads him to the oracle, to Apollo, to guidance. And the answer he receives is not simple, not immediate, not forgiving. He must serve 12 labors under the authority of King Eurystheus, not as a ruler, not as a hero, but as something closer to a servant. Each task designed not just to challenge him, but to test him, to force him into situations where strength alone will not be enough. The first labor is the Nemean lion, a creature with skin that cannot be pierced. Weapons fail, arrows break, and Heracles must adapt. He strangles the lion using his own strength directly, and then uses its hide as armor. The first lesson: Power must be applied differently depending on the problem. The second labor, the Lernaean Hydra, a creature with multiple heads. Cut one off and two grow back. Force alone creates more problems. So Heracles changes approach. With help, he cauterizes the wounds, preventing regrowth. Strategy begins to emerge. The third, the Cyrenian Hind. Not a monster, but a creature of great speed and significance. He must capture it alive. This is not about destruction, but control, patience. The fourth, the Erymanthian Boar. The fifth, cleaning the Augean stables. Not a battle, but a task. Humbling, absurd, requiring creativity more than strength. He redirects rivers, completing in a day what would take years. Each labor shifts the nature of the challenge. Some demand strength. Others require intelligence, endurance, adaptation. The pattern is clear. Heracles is not just proving power. He is learning how to use it. The later labors push this further. The capture of Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld. A descent into death itself. And a return. The retrieval of the golden apples. A task involving deception, negotiation, and understanding of divine boundaries. At each stage, Heracles is no longer just reacting. He is thinking, changing, becoming something more complex. But the labors do not erase his past. They do not undo what happened. They redefine him in relation to it. Because redemption in Greek mythology is not about removal of guilt. It is about transformation through action. Heracles completes the 12 labors. But his life does not become peaceful. He continues to face challenges, conflicts, mistakes, because growth is not a straight path. And even at the end, his story does not conclude quietly. His death comes through deception, through poison, through something beyond his control. And yet, even in death, he does not vanish. He is elevated, becomes something more. A god, but not because he was perfect. Because he endured. Because he changed. Because he faced what he had done and continued forward. Heracles represents something fundamental in Greek mythology. That strength is not enough. That power without control leads to destruction. But also, that failure does not end the story. That action can redefine identity. That even within a system shaped by gods and fate, humans can move, adapt, become something more than what they began as. And with Heracles, the idea of the hero reaches its full form. Not just a figure who defeats monsters, but one who confronts himself. And that complexity will carry forward. Because the next heroes will not just face physical challenges. They will face moral ones, political ones, identity itself. And among them, one will shape the identity of an entire city. A hero not defined by strength alone, but by intelligence, risk, and consequence. His name is Theseus. If Heracles represents strength tested to its limits, then Theseus represents something different. Choice, identity, the shaping of civilization itself. Because Theseus is not just a hero. He is a founder. His story is not only about monsters and trials, but about what it means to build something lasting, to define a people, to create order where none existed before. His origins, like many heroes, are layered. He is born to Aethra, a mortal woman. But his father is uncertain. On one level, it is Aegeus, king of Athens. On another, Poseidon. This dual identity defines him from the beginning. Human and something more. But unlike Heracles, Theseus does not grow up in a royal court. He is raised away from Athens in Troezen. And before Aegeus leaves, he hides a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone. A test. When the boy is strong enough to lift the stone, he will be ready to claim his identity. Years pass. Theseus grows. And eventually he lifts the stone. Not just an act of strength, but a transition from unknown to defined, from youth to purpose. He sets out for Athens, but he does not take the easy path. The sea route is safer, vaster, but Theseus chooses land. A deliberate decision, because the land route is dangerous, filled with bandits, monsters, and challenges. And this is where his story begins to take shape. One by one, he encounters figures who represent disorder. Periphetes, who kills travelers with a club. Cines, who bends trees to tear people apart. Cyan, who throws victims from cliffs. Procrustes, who forces travelers to fit his bed, stretching or cutting them. Each represents a distortion of order, a misuse of power. And Theseus does something significant. He does not simply defeat them. He punishes them in the same way they punished others. A mirror, a reflection. Justice not as abstract principle, but as direct consequence. And through these acts, he clears the path. Not just physically, but symbolically. He transforms a dangerous road into a controlled one. And in doing so, begins to shape the world around him. By the time he reaches Athens, he is already more than a traveler. He is a force. But Athens itself is not stable. Aegeus, his father, does not immediately recognize him. And within the court, there is tension. Medea, present at the time, sees him as a threat, attempts to eliminate him. But the truth emerges. The sword, the sandals, recognition. Theseus claims his place. But his greatest challenge is not within the city. It comes from outside, from Crete, from a debt. Years earlier, Athens had been defeated by King Minos. And as part of the punishment, every 9 years, Athens must send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete, to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a creature that is not simply a monster, but a symbol. Half man, half bull, trapped within the labyrinth. A structure so complex that no one who enters can find their way out. This is not just a test of strength. It is a test of navigation, of understanding, of confronting something that exists at the edge of identity itself. Theseus volunteers, not because he is forced, but because he chooses to act. This is key. Heroism is no longer reactive. It is intentional. He travels to Crete, enters the system designed to ensure failure. But once again, intervention changes everything. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, sees him, helps him, gives him a thread, a simple tool but essential. Because defeating the Minotaur is only part of the challenge. Escaping the labyrinth is the real test. Theseus enters, finds the creature, kills it. But unlike Heracles, this is not about overwhelming strength. It is about moving through complexity, following a path, understanding structure, and then retracing it. He escapes with the others, breaks the cycle, ends the sacrifice, and returns. But even here, the story does not resolve cleanly. On the journey back, Theseus leaves Ariadne behind. The reasons vary. Abandonment, fate, intervention of gods. But the result is the same. Victory is incomplete. And then the final moment. Before leaving Athens, Aegeus had given Theseus a simple instruction. If you succeed, raise white sails. If you fail, black sails. A signal, clear, definitive. But Theseus forgets, or neglects, or fails to act. And as his ship approaches, the sails remain black. Aegeus sees them, believes his son is dead, and throws himself into the sea. The Aegean Sea, named after him. And just like that, triumph becomes tragedy. Theseus succeeds. He defeats the Minotaur. He ends the sacrifice. He returns. But he also causes the death of his father. Not through intent, but through failure to complete the process. And this is what defines his story. Not perfection, but consequence. Because in Greek mythology, even success carries cost. Theseus becomes king, unifies Athens, transforms it from a collection of settlements into a single identity. A city, a system, a civilization. And in doing so, he becomes something more than a hero. A founder, a symbol. But like all figures in this world, his story is not free from complexity, not free from mistakes, not free from consequence. And that pattern continues, because the next cycle of myths moves deeper, away from individual heroism, and into something darker, something more inevitable. A story not about defeating monsters, but about confronting fate itself. The Theban cycle, where the enemy is not external, but internal, where the greatest struggle is not against the world, but against what cannot be escaped. And at the center of it is a man who tries to outrun destiny and fails. His name is Oedipus. If Theseus represents choice, then Oedipus represents its limits. Because in this story, action does not create freedom. It reveals inevitability. The Theban cycle is not about monsters, not about distant quests. It is about something far more unsettling. Fate, not as an idea, but as something that cannot be escaped. The story begins, as many do, with a prophecy. Laius, king of Thebes, receives a warning. His son will kill him and marry his wife. It is clear, specific, unavoidable. And like those before him, Laius responds the same way. He tries to prevent it. When his son is born, he does not raise him. He does not wait. He acts immediately. The child's ankles are pierced, bound together, and he is left on a mountainside to die. Exposure, abandonment, erasure. The child is meant to disappear before the prophecy can begin. But once again, fate does not follow intention. The child survives, rescued, taken to another kingdom, raised by King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth, given a new identity, a new life, and a new name. Oedipus. He grows up unaware of his origin, believing himself to be the true son of Corinth, until one moment changes everything. A rumor, a suggestion, a question of identity. He seeks the truth, not from his parents, but from the oracle. And the oracle does not answer his question. It gives him something else. A prophecy. He will kill his father and marry his mother. Oedipus reacts immediately, not with denial, but with decision. He will leave Corinth. He will distance himself from the people he believes to be his parents. He will avoid the prophecy. And this is where the story becomes something more than tragic. Because every action he takes to escape fate brings him closer to it. On the road away from Corinth, Oedipus encounters a man. A confrontation. A moment of conflict. Words escalate. Tempers rise. And Oedipus kills him. Not knowing who he is. Not knowing what it means. The man is Laius. His father. The first part of the prophecy is fulfilled. Without intention. Without awareness. Without control. Oedipus continues. Arrives at Thebes. A city in crisis. The Sphinx blocks its entrance. A creature that does not rely on strength, but on knowledge. It poses a riddle. And those who fail die. The city is trapped. Unable to move forward. Until Oedipus arrives. He listens. Thinks. Answers. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Man. Child. Adult. Old age. The answer is simple, but only if understood. The Sphinx is defeated. The city is saved. And Oedipus is rewarded. He becomes king. And marries the queen. Jocasta, his mother. The second part of the prophecy is fulfilled. Again, without awareness. For a time, everything appears stable. Oedipus rules well. The city thrives. But Greek mythology does not allow hidden truths to remain buried. Eventually, something breaks. A plague strikes Thebes. And like all such events, it demands explanation. Oedipus seeks it. Determined to find the cause. To restore order. To fix what has gone wrong. But the answer is not external. It is not a monster. Not a curse from afar. It is him. The truth emerges slowly. Piece by piece. Through witnesses. Through memory. Through recognition. Until it cannot be denied. Oedipus understands. Everything. What he has done. What he has become. And what it means. His response is not denial. Not escape. But punishment. He blinds himself. Not because he cannot see the world. But because he cannot bear to see it. To see what he has done. To see the reality he has created. Jocasta does not survive. And Thebes is left with the consequences. Oedipus is exiled. Removed. Not as a criminal alone. But as a figure marked by something larger than action. Fate. And this is what defines the Theban cycle. Not just what happens, but what it means. That knowledge does not prevent destiny. That intention does not override outcome. That identity itself can be unknowable until it is too late. But the story does not end with Oedipus. Because consequences do not stop with one person. They extend to the next generation. His sons, Eteocles and Polynices, inherit not just a kingdom, but a curse. They are meant to share power, to rule in turns. But like many before them, they do not maintain balance. They compete, refuse to yield, and conflict begins. Polynices leaves gathers an army, returns to claim what he believes is his. The Seven against Thebes. A war, not between strangers, but between brothers. And in the end, they kill each other. The cycle continues, not through fate alone, but through choice influenced by it. Antigone, their sister, becomes the final figure in this sequence. She does not fight. She does not rule. She defies. When Creon, the new king, forbids the burial of Polyneices, Antigone refuses to obey. Because for her, divine law matters more than human command. She buries her brother and accepts the consequence. Death. Her story is not about victory. It is about principle, about standing against authority, even when the outcome is known. And with her, the Theban cycle closes, not with resolution, but with understanding that some stories are not about overcoming fate, but about revealing it, living within it, responding to it, and accepting that not everything can be changed. This is the darkest part of Greek mythology, because it removes the illusion of control. But it also deepens the narrative, because from here, the stories expand again, from individual tragedy to something larger, a conflict that will involve gods, heroes, and entire civilizations. The Trojan War, where fate, choice, pride, and power will collide on a scale greater than anything before. And it begins, not with battle, but with a decision, a judgment, and a single moment that will change everything. After the tragedies of Thebes, the focus of Greek mythology expands again. From individual fate to collective consequence. From a single life shaped by prophecy to an entire world drawn into conflict. Because the Trojan War does not begin with armies. It begins with a moment, a decision, a choice that seems small but carries the weight of everything that follows. It begins with a wedding, the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, a union between mortal and divine, already significant, already layered with meaning. The gods gather. Olympus itself turns its attention to the event. All are invited, all except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. And exclusion in Greek mythology is never neutral. It creates imbalance, and imbalance demands expression. Eris does not arrive openly. She does not disrupt the wedding through force. She introduces something far more effective. A golden apple. Simple, beautiful, inscribed with a single phrase. To the fairest. And then she disappears. But the effect remains. Because the apple does not define who it belongs to. It invites interpretation. And immediately, three goddesses step forward. Hera, Athene, Aphrodite. Each claims the title. Each believes herself worthy. And none will yield. Zeus is asked to decide, to judge. But Zeus understands something critical. This is not a choice without consequence. Whichever goddess he selects, the others will not accept it quietly. So he refuses, not out of indecision, but out of awareness. He passes the judgment to someone else, someone outside Olympus, someone who does not fully understand the weight of the decision. Paris, a prince of Troy, but not living as one, raised as a shepherd distant from power, unaware of his full identity. And this matters, because Paris is not prepared, not for the choice, not for the manipulation that follows. The goddesses appear before him, not in disguise, not subtly, directly, and each offers him something. Not arguments, not evidence, but gifts. Hera offers power, kingship, dominion over vast lands. Athene offers wisdom, victory in war, strategic brilliance. Aphrodite offers something different. Not control, not mastery, but desire. The love of the most beautiful woman in the world. And Paris chooses, not based on duty, not based on consequence, but based on desire. He gives the apple to Aphrodite. And in that moment, the war begins. Not immediately, not visibly, but inevitably. Because the woman Aphrodite promises is Helen, and Helen is not free. She is married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. And this is where personal choice becomes political consequence. Paris travels to Sparta, received as a guest, protected by the sacred laws of hospitality. And then he breaks them. He takes Helen, whether by persuasion, by force, or by mutual decision depends on the version of the myth. But the result is the same. He leaves with her, and in doing so violates something fundamental. Not just a relationship, but a system. Hospitality is sacred. Guest and host are bound by trust. And Paris breaks that trust. Menelaus responds, not alone, but through alliance. Because Helen was not just any woman. Before her marriage, her suitors had sworn an oath to defend her, to protect her marriage, to stand together if it was ever threatened. And now it is. So Menelaus calls upon them, and they answer. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, takes command. Odysseus, Ajax, Diomedes, Achilles. Each brings their own story, their own motivations, their own strengths. But they are united by one purpose: to retrieve Helen, to restore what has been taken. But beneath that purpose, something else exists. Pride, honor, reputation. Because this is not just about one woman. It is about status, power, the perception of strength. If the act goes unanswered, it sets a precedent, and that cannot be allowed. The Greek forces gather. Ships, armies, a coalition of kingdoms. And yet, even before they depart, there is resistance. The winds do not favor them. The sea does not cooperate. And once again, the gods are involved. Artemis, angered by Agamemnon, demands sacrifice. Not symbolic, not minor. His daughter, Iphigenia. And this moment reveals something essential. Even leaders, even kings, are not free from the demands of the divine. Agamemnon faces a choice: family or war. And he chooses war. The sacrifice is made. The winds change. The fleet sails. And the final stage is set. On the other side, Troy prepares. King Priam rules. Hector leads. Paris stands at the center of it all. Not as a warrior, but as the cause. The city fortifies, waits, understands what is coming. Because this is no longer a personal conflict. It is a collision between two worlds, driven by choice, shaped by pride, influenced by gods. And once it begins, it will not end quickly. 10 years of war, of loss, of shifting power, of heroes rising and falling. And at the heart of it will be a figure who defines the very idea of heroism, not through perfection, but through intensity, emotion, conflict. His name is Achilles, and his story will define the war itself. War begins long before the first strike. It builds through decisions, through pride, through the weight of everything that cannot be undone. And when the Greek forces finally arrive at Troy, the conflict that follows is not immediate resolution. It is duration. 10 years. 10 years of siege, skirmish, stalemate, and shifting momentum. Because Troy does not fall easily. Its walls hold. Its defenders endure. And both sides begin to understand something difficult. This war will not be decided quickly. It will be shaped slowly by individuals, by moments, by choices that carry consequences far beyond themselves. At the center of it all is Achilles, the greatest warrior among the Greeks. Not just strong, not just skilled, but unmatched. His presence alone shifts the balance of the battlefield. And yet, his story is not defined by victory. It is defined by rage. At the beginning of the Iliad, the war has already been ongoing for years. Battles have been fought. Lives have been lost. But the turning point does not come from Troy. It comes from within the Greek camp. Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces, takes a prize. A woman, Briseis, but she is not his to take. She belongs to Achilles, not as a possession alone, but as a symbol of honor. And in Greek culture, honor is not abstract. It is everything. It defines status, identity, worth. When Agamemnon takes Briseis, he does not just insult Achilles. He diminishes him, publicly, deliberately. And Achilles responds, not with violence against Agamemnon, but with withdrawal. He refuses to fight. And this decision changes everything. Because Achilles is not just another warrior. He is the warrior. Without him, the Greek advantage disappears. The Trojans push forward, led by Hector, Prince of Troy, warrior, defender. Unlike Achilles, Hector does not fight for personal honor alone. He fights for his city, his family, his people. And that difference matters. Because while Achilles withdraws out of pride, Hector continues out of responsibility. The balance shifts. The Greeks begin to lose ground. Pressure builds. Appeals are made. Attempts to reconcile. But Achilles refuses. Because for him, the issue is not strategy. It is respect. And until that is restored, he will not act. This is the central tension of the war. Not just between Greeks and Trojans, but within the Greeks themselves. And it escalates until it reaches a point of no return. Patroclus, friend, companion, closest figure to Achilles, sees what is happening, understands the consequences, and makes a decision. He enters the battle wearing Achilles' armor, not to deceive entirely, but to inspire, to push the Trojans back. And for a moment, it works. The Greeks regain momentum. The Trojans retreat. But then Hector confronts him and kills him, not knowing at first who he truly is. And when the truth becomes clear, it changes everything. Because now the conflict is no longer about honor. It is about loss. Achilles learns what has happened, and the reaction is immediate. Total, overwhelming. His rage returns, but it is different now, not directed at Agamemnon, not focused on pride, but on grief, on vengeance. He returns to the battlefield, and the war shifts instantly. The Trojans cannot hold against him. They fall back, retreat, until Hector stands alone, outside the walls of Troy, facing what he knows is coming. Hector does not flee immediately. He hesitates, considers, understands the weight of the moment, then runs, not out of cowardice, but out of human instinct. And Achilles pursues, around the city, until finally they face each other. The duel is not equal, not in outcome. Achilles kills Hector, and in doing so, achieves what he set out to do. But the story does not end there, because what follows defines Achilles even more than the victory. He desecrates the body, drags it behind his chariot, refuses burial, refuses dignity. This is not justice. This is excess. And it reveals something important, that even the greatest hero can go too far. Eventually, Priam, king of Troy, comes to him, not as a ruler, not as an enemy, but as a father. He enters the Greek camp, approaches Achilles directly, and asks for his son's body, not with force, but with humility, with grief. And in that moment, Achilles sees something, not an enemy, but a reflection, a shared loss, and something shifts. He returns the body, allows Hector to be buried, and for a brief moment, the war pauses, not ended, but softened by recognition, by humanity. And this is what defines the Iliad. Not victory, not conquest, but emotion, rage, grief, honor, and the cost of all of it. Because the war continues, beyond Hector, beyond Achilles, toward something inevitable, the fall of Troy. But that fall will not come through strength alone. It will come through deception, through strategy, through a final act that ends not just the war, but an entire age. And it begins with a plan, a structure, a gift. That is not a gift at all. War does not end when one side grows tired. It ends when one side changes the rules. After the death of Hector and the withdrawal of Achilles, the Trojan War continues in a strange, suspended state. Neither side can achieve decisive victory through force alone. The Greeks have their greatest warrior, but even Achilles cannot breach the walls of Troy. The Trojans have strong defenders, but they cannot push the Greeks back into the sea. So the war becomes something else. Not conquest, not movement, but endurance. Years pass, heroes fall, strategies shift, and slowly the idea of victory through strength begins to fade. Because Troy is not just defended by soldiers, it is defended by architecture, by structure, by walls that were said to have been built by the gods themselves. And so the Greeks begin to understand a truth that changes everything. If the walls cannot be broken, then the problem is not the enemy outside. It is how to get inside. This is where Odysseus emerges again, not as the strongest warrior, not as the fastest, but as the most intelligent. Because when brute force fails, intelligence becomes the only path forward. And Odysseus begins to plan. The idea is simple. Not direct assault, not another siege, but deception. Something that appears to end the war while secretly delivering the means of victory. The Greeks begin construction. A massive wooden structure. A horse, but not just a sculpture. Not just a symbol. It is hollow. A vessel. A hiding place. Inside it, elite warriors wait. Silent. Prepared. And the rest of the Greek army does something even more important. They leave. Their ships sail away from Troy, disappearing over the horizon. To all appearances, the war is over. The Greeks have given up. Troy has survived. The enemy has retreated. And this is where the deception works. Because Troy is not just exhausted. It is relieved. After years of siege, the disappearance of the Greek army feels like release. Like survival. And then they see it. The horse, left behind, on the battlefield. A gift, a mystery, a possible offering to the gods. And here the city divides itself. Because not everyone trusts it. Some see danger. Some see trickery. But others see victory. And eventually those voices win. The horse is brought inside the city, dragged through the gates that were never meant to open for it. A decision made not through strategy, but through interpretation. What does it mean? Why was it left? Is it sacred or dangerous? And in Greek mythology, ambiguity is never safe. That night, the city celebrates. Feast, rest, relief. After 10 years of war, Troy believes it has survived. But inside, the horse's silence breaks. The hidden warriors emerge. The gates are opened from within. And the Greek army, which had never truly left, returns under cover of darkness. The city is no longer defended. It is exposed. What follows is not a battle. It is collapse. Troy falls not because it was overpowered, but because it was infiltrated. Not through weakness in walls, but through weakness in judgment. Kings are killed. Temples are destroyed. The city is consumed by fire. Everything that defined Troy as a civilization begins to unravel in a single night. And among the survivors, there is no stability. Only escape, flight, displacement. Because this is not just the end of a war. It is the end of a world. The fall of Troy marks a turning point in Greek mythology. Because up until now, stories have been about heroes, gods, challenges, and cycles. But after Troy, everything changes. The heroes are gone. The war is over. But no one returns unchanged. And none more so than Odysseus. Because while others go home quickly, his journey is only beginning. And it will not be a return. It will be a transformation. A long passage through suffering, temptation, loss, and identity. A journey not defined by battle, but by endurance across time itself. Because the next story is not about victory. It is about return. And return is never simple. It is the Odyssey. Victory at Troy does not bring peace. It brings separation. Because war is not just destruction of cities, it is disruption of lives. When Troy falls, the Greek world does not reunite, it disperses. Ships leave in different directions. Leaders follow different paths, and what should have been a return becomes something far more complex. A fragmentation of identity. And at the center of this fragmentation is Odysseus. Unlike Achilles, whose story ends in the war, or Hector, whose story ends within it, Odysseus survives it. But survival is not resolution. It is continuation. The journey home to Ithaca is supposed to be simple. A return, a restoration of order. But Greek mythology does not allow simplicity, because Odysseus is not just returning to a place. He is returning to a life that no longer exists in the same form. And the world he must cross is not empty. It is filled with trials, each one not designed to kill him directly, but to reshape him. The first major disruption comes from the Cicons, a reminder that even after Troy, violence still exists in the world. Odysseus and his men raid a city but linger too long. They celebrate too early, and they are punished for it. This becomes the first lesson of the journey. Victory does not guarantee safety. Then comes the land of the Lotus Eaters. Here the danger is not violence. It is forgetfulness. Those who consume the lotus lose the desire to return home. They lose identity, memory, purpose, and Odysseus must physically pull his men away. Because forgetting in Greek mythology is not peace. It is erasure. Next comes the Cyclops, Polyphemus, a being of immense strength but limited perception. Odysseus does not defeat him through force. He defeats him through intelligence. He blinds him. He deceives him. And when asked his name, he says, "Nobody." This moment defines Odysseus more than any battle. Because he does not win through strength. He wins through language, through identity manipulation, through thinking ahead of consequence. But even intelligence has cost. Polyphemus calls upon Poseidon, his father, and Poseidon listens. From this moment onward, the sea itself becomes hostile. The journey is no longer just difficult. It is personal. Storms rise. Roots collapse. Time distorts. Odysseus is not just traveling home. He is being resisted by the world. Then comes Aeolus, keeper of winds. Odysseus is given a gift, a bag containing all winds that could hinder his voyage. For a moment, success seems certain. But again, misunderstanding destroys progress. His crew, thinking the bag contains treasure, opens it, and everything is released. The journey collapses backward. This pattern repeats. Knowledge misunderstood becomes failure. Trust misused becomes destruction. Then comes Circe, a goddess who transforms men into animals. Here Odysseus does something different. He does not only resist. He adapts. With divine assistance, he confronts her. And instead of destruction, negotiation occurs. Circe becomes both obstacle and guide. A strange pattern emerges in the Odyssey. Enemies are not always enemies. They are forces to be understood. Not all conflict is resolved through violence. Some is resolved through transformation. But the journey does not stabilize. It deepens. Odysseus travels to the underworld, not physically as conquest, but as necessity. There he speaks with the dead, with Achilles, with prophets, with figures who reveal truths about fate, survival, and limitation. And the message is consistent. Return will not be easy. It will not be direct. It will not be clean. Because identity itself must be tested. Then comes the sirens, beings whose song destroys reason. Not through force, but through desire. Odysseus adapts again. He is tied to the mast. His men block their ears, and he listens without acting. A rare moment in mythology. Knowledge without consequence. But even this is temporary, because Scylla and Charybdis await. No perfect choice exists, only trade-offs. Loss is inevitable, and Odysseus learns the central truth of the Odyssey. There is no path without cost. Eventually, he loses everything. His men, his ships, his certainty. And yet he continues, alone, until he reaches Calypso, an island outside time. Here he is offered immortality, eternal peace, no suffering, no journey, but also no return. And Odysseus refuses, because identity in Greek mythology is not just survival. It is connection to place, to home, to memory. Finally, after years of wandering, he returns to Ithaca. But he is not recognized, not as king, not as husband, not as identity. He must reclaim everything, through disguise, through testing, through patience. And when he finally reveals himself, it is not just reunion. It is restoration. Order is re-established, but not unchanged, because Odysseus is not the same man who left, and Ithaca is not the same place. Return in Greek mythology is never a reversal. It is transformation completed. And with that, the heroic age begins to close, because the focus is shifting again, away from heroes who travel, toward something older, something deeper, something inevitable, the structure that awaits all life, the underworld, and the meaning of what comes after existence ends. In Greek mythology, every journey eventually points downward, not physically at first, but inevitably, because beneath all stories of heroes, wars, and returns lies a quieter truth. Everything ends, and what happens after that ending defines the final structure of the mythological world. The underworld is not simply a place of punishment. It is not just darkness or fear. It is a system, a realm governed by order, separation, and consequence. And its ruler is Hades. Unlike Zeus or Poseidon, Hades is not a conqueror. He does not expand his domain. He does not seek attention. He governs what has already ended. The dead do not fight him. They arrive, and they remain. The underworld itself is structured into regions. Not all souls are treated equally. Some drift in a neutral existence. Some are punished. Some are rewarded, but most simply exist in memory of what they were. At the entrance stands Cerberus, the three-headed guardian, not aggressive without cause, but absolute in function. Nothing leaves without permission. Nothing escapes by accident. And once a soul enters, identity becomes fixed. No further change. No further growth. Only continuation in another form. But even within this system, there are layers. The Asphodel Meadows hold ordinary souls. Those who lived without great heroism or great crime. Not punished. Not rewarded. Simply existing. A reflection of average life. A quiet afterimage of existence. Deeper still lies Tartarus. Not just punishment, but containment. Here reside those who violated fundamental order. The Titans after their defeat. Figures whose actions threatened cosmic structure itself. Their punishment is not always destruction. It is permanence. endless consequence. Below even mythic monsters and divine prisoners lies the conceptual foundation of Tartarus, that some actions cannot be undone. And then there are the fields of Elysium, reserved for heroes, for those whose lives achieved something beyond survival. Not perfection, but significance. Here existence is peaceful, structured, closer to idealized memory than reality. But even Elysium is not escape from the central truth of Greek mythology. That identity is defined by what has already happened, not what could still change. Odysseus' journey into the underworld in the Odyssey reveals this structure more clearly than any description. He does not go there to conquer. He goes to understand, to speak with the dead, to learn what cannot be known from the living world. And what he finds is not comfort. It is perspective. Achilles, once the greatest warrior among the Greeks, speaks from the underworld with a striking statement. He would rather be a living servant than rule over the dead. A reversal of heroic logic. Because glory in life does not translate into fulfillment in death. The dead do not compete. They do not achieve. They exist in memory alone. This reshapes the entire meaning of heroism. Because if greatness lays here, then greatness is not final, only transitional. Prophets speak as well. Warnings continue beyond death. Guidance is offered, but not action. And that is the difference. The underworld can reveal truth, but it cannot change outcomes. That remains in the realm of the living. Yet even the living are always moving toward it. Every story in Greek mythology eventually aligns with this structure. No matter how powerful the hero, no matter how great the king, no matter how favored by gods, all paths converge here. And that convergence gives meaning to everything before it. Because without the underworld, there is no limit. Without limit, there is no consequence. And without consequence, there is no story. Even gods recognize this boundary. They do not rule the dead. They rule above it, separate from it, but not immune to its logic. Because Greek mythology does not treat death as punishment alone. It treats it as completion, a final state that defines all prior states. And in that structure, the importance of mortal life becomes clearer. Because it is temporary, fragile, irreplaceable. The underworld is not just an end point. It is a reflection of balance. What is taken from life is preserved in form. What is lost in time is preserved in memory. And what is achieved is preserved in narrative. This is why heroes matter. Not because they avoid death, but because they give shape to what exists before it. And yet, even this system is not the final layer. Because beyond the underworld, beyond Olympus, beyond the cycle of heroes and kings, Greek mythology begins to shift again, away from myth as explanation of the ancient world, toward myth as cultural memory, as identity, as philosophy, because later generations will not simply tell these stories. They will interpret them, question them, reframe them, and use them to understand human nature itself. The gods will become symbols, the heroes will become archetypes, and the underworld will become a metaphor. But at this stage in the mythological narrative, it is still real, still structured, still absolute. And that absolute structure prepares the final stage of the entire mythological system. Not the world of gods, not the world of heroes, but the transition between myth and history, where belief begins to transform into legacy, and the stories of gods and mortals begin to become something else entirely, a cultural memory that will survive long after belief itself changes. And that final transformation brings the entire system toward its conclusion. By the time the great cycles of gods and heroes begin to settle, something subtle changes. Not in the stories themselves, but in how they are carried. Because Greek mythology does not end with a final battle or a single collapse. It dissolves gradually into interpretation. The heroic age fades not because it is defeated, but because it is no longer the primary way people explain the world. What remains is memory, fragmented, rewritten, retold. And in that process, myth begins to shift from lived belief into cultural structure. The world of gods and heroes becomes something that explains more than events. It begins to explain meaning, why suffering exists, why power is unstable, why fate feels unavoidable, why human life is both significant and limited at the same time. The final heroic generation does not vanish in a single moment. It disperses. Some figures are absorbed into cities, becoming local founders, ancestral symbols, civic identities. Others become moral examples, warnings, ideals, or contradictions that thinkers later try to understand. Even the Olympian gods begin to change in perception. No longer only active rulers of reality. They become representations of forces. Zeus becomes authority. Athene becomes intelligence. Ares becomes violence. Aphrodite becomes desire. This transformation does not erase belief. It reframes it. Because mythology in its later form is not just explanation of the physical world. It becomes explanation of human experience. And this shift is essential. Because once heroes like Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, and Odysseus complete their cycles, there are no new equivalents that fully match them. Instead, stories begin to branch, becoming local legends, tragic plays, philosophical interpretations, and eventually literature. The Trojan War, for example, is no longer just a historical mythic event. It becomes a foundation for exploring human emotion. Rage in Achilles, cunning in Odysseus, duty in Hector. Each figure stops being only a character in a war and becomes a lens through which human behavior is examined. This is where Greek mythology begins to merge with thought, with philosophy, with early attempts to understand ethics, justice, identity, and fate. The gods remain present, but their roles shift. They become explanatory tools, symbols of forces that shape existence rather than direct participants in it. Even fate itself begins to be reconsidered. Is it absolute? Or is it a narrative structure humans use to understand cause and consequence? The Theban cycle raises this question. The Trojan War expands it. The underworld system solidifies it. But the later interpretation of these myths begins to loosen it. Because if stories can be retold differently, then meaning itself is flexible. And that flexibility marks the transition away from myth as lived reality. Temples still stand. Rituals continue. But intellectual life begins to ask different questions. Why do gods behave like humans? Why do humans suffer under divine systems? What does justice mean in a world where fate exists? Greek tragedy emerges from this space. Playwrights take mythological figures and reshape them for reflection rather than worship alone. Oedipus becomes not just a king who fulfills prophecy, but a study of knowledge and ignorance. Agamemnon becomes not just a commander, but a figure of moral conflict. Medea becomes not just a sorceress, but an exploration of grief, betrayal, and rage. Myth stops being static. It becomes interpretive. And this is the final phase of its transformation. The gods remain in stories, but increasingly they are read as expressions of patterns in human life. Storms are no longer just caused by Poseidon. They represent instability. War is no longer just driven by Ares. It represents conflict inherent in civilization. Love is no longer only Aphrodite's influence. It becomes psychological force. Even heroes begin to shift. Heracles is no longer just a man of strength. He becomes endurance under suffering. Odysseus becomes intelligence, navigating uncertainty. Achilles becomes emotion, overwhelming reason. These are no longer just individuals. They become archetypes, patterns that repeat. And this is where Greek mythology ultimately settles, not as a closed system of belief, but as an open system of meaning, a framework that later cultures, writers, philosophers, and artists continue to use long after the original context fades. The myths survive not because they remain literal truth, but because they remain useful truth. They describe something persistent in human experience, that life is shaped by forces larger than individual control, that choices matter even within constraint, and that identity is formed through tension between desire, duty, fate, and consequence. And so the heroic age ends, not with silence, but with transformation. The gods do not disappear. The heroes are not forgotten. The underworld does not close. Instead, they all remain, but in a different form, as language, as structure, as memory. And from this point forward, Greek mythology is no longer just a narrative of divine action. It becomes a mirror, reflecting the human condition across time. And that is why it continues, not because it answers every question, but because it keeps asking them. By the time Greek mythology reaches its final phase as a living tradition, it no longer behaves like a single continuous story. It behaves like a system of echoes. Stories repeat. Figures reappear in new contexts. Symbols detach from literal meaning and begin to operate as deeper reference points for human experience. The gods are still there, but increasingly they are no longer treated as active rulers of the physical world in the same immediate sense. Instead, they become frameworks for understanding existence itself. And this is where the final transformation happens. Myth becomes meaning, not abandoned, not erased, but absorbed into culture, philosophy, and identity. Across centuries, poets, dramatists, historians, and thinkers revisit the same stories again and again, not to preserve them unchanged, but to reinterpret them, to ask what they reveal about human nature, what they reveal about power, about suffering, about choice, and about the limits of control. Zeus, once the literal ruler of Olympus, begins to function as a representation of authority itself. Not just divine authority, but any system of power that governs from above. Athene becomes more than a goddess of war and wisdom. She becomes a structured intelligence, strategic thinking, the idea that reason can shape outcomes even in chaotic environments. Ares becomes conflict in its purest form. Not just war between armies, but the inevitability of confrontation when interests collide. Aphrodite becomes desire, not just romantic attraction, but the irrational force that influences decisions beyond logic. Apollo becomes clarity, order, interpretation, the human need to find patterns in chaos. Dionysus becomes dissolution of structure, emotion without restraint, the breaking of boundaries that normally define identity. And Hades becomes finality, not punishment alone, but the simple, unavoidable closure of existence. Even the heroes evolve in meaning. Heracles is no longer just the strongest man who completed impossible labors. He becomes endurance under suffering, the ability to continue despite consequence. Perseus becomes intelligence confronting danger. Theseus becomes civilization forming itself through structure and decision. Achilles becomes the danger of unchecked emotion when honor becomes absolute. Odysseus becomes adaptability in a world that refuses stability. Oedipus becomes the tension between knowledge and blindness. Each figure stops being only a character in a myth and becomes a model of human possibility. And this is the key transformation. Greek mythology survives not because it is fixed, but because it is flexible. It can be read as religion, as history, as allegory, as psychology, as philosophy, as literature. It adapts to whatever question is being asked. Why do humans suffer? Why do powerful systems fail? Why does intelligence sometimes lead to tragedy? Why does desire override reason? Why does fate feel inevitable even when choice exists? The myths do not provide a single answer. They provide structure for asking. And that is why they persist. Even after belief in literal gods declines, the stories remain embedded in language, thought, and culture. They become references, metaphors, foundational patterns for storytelling itself. The Trojan War becomes the archetype of long, costly conflict driven by pride and consequence. The Odyssey becomes the archetype of return, identity, and survival through intelligence. The Theban cycle becomes the archetype of fate and the limits of understanding. These patterns repeat far beyond ancient Greece. In literature, in theater, in modern storytelling, in psychology, in political theory, even in everyday language. The mythological framework becomes invisible but still active, a structure underneath interpretation. And perhaps the most important realization embedded in Greek mythology is this: the gods do not exist outside human experience. They express it. They give form to forces that already shape life. So when mythology shifts from belief to interpretation, it does not disappear. It deepens. Because instead of asking, do the gods exist? The question becomes, what do these stories reveal about us? And in that question, mythology becomes timeless. The pantheon becomes a map of human forces. The heroes become case studies of human behavior under pressure. The underworld becomes a reflection of how humans understand endings. And the world itself becomes a narrative space where meaning is constantly constructed and reconstructed. There is no final conclusion in Greek mythology, no single ending that closes everything permanently, because the stories were never designed to end. They were designed to continue being told, and retold, and reinterpreted. From temple rituals to classical drama, from ancient poetry to modern analysis, from belief to metaphor, from myth to meaning. And that is why Greek mythology still exists today, not as a forgotten system, but as a living language of symbols, a way of understanding power, emotion, fate, identity, and human limitation. A mirror that does not show one fixed reflection, but changes depending on who is looking into it and what they are trying to understand. So the story does not truly end here. It continues wherever it is read, wherever it is retold, wherever humans try to make sense of themselves through stories older than memory. And in that sense, Greek mythology is not a history of gods. It is a history of interpretation, a history of meaning itself. And it remains open, always.